The sky above the capital city was heavy with storm clouds, though no rain fell. Great towers of silver stone reached high into the dark air, and banners of the royal crest hung weakly in the cold wind. In the heart of the city stood the Grand Plaza, a vast place where thousands of citizens had gathered. Their faces showed worry and fear, for their world was in danger of falling. Queen Arya stood at the highest balcony of the palace, looking down at her people. Her crown was not made of gold but of living crystal that glowed faintly, yet even its light seemed dimmer than before. For many years she had led her people against the Kor, a cruel enemy that came from the far side of the stars. The war had dragged on, battle after battle, loss after loss. Her fleets were shrinking, her soldiers tired, and the enemy pressed closer each day. The queen's advisors stood behind her, whispering among themselves, but none had answers that could bring peace. The Kor outnumbered them, outgunned them, and seemed unstoppable. The queen's heart was heavy, yet she forced herself to be strong. She knew her people needed hope, even if hope was fading. She raised her hand, and the plaza grew silent. Her voice rang clear, though sorrow hid beneath it. "My people," she said, "you have fought with courage. You have given your strength, your sons and daughters, your very lives to defend our world. Yet the Kor still come. I will not lie to you, the war goes against us. But I ask you to stand firm, for even in the darkest night, we must not forget the light of who we are." The crowd listened, but there was no cheer. Many lowered their heads, some whispered fears. They had heard words before, but words did not stop enemy ships. At the edge of the crowd stood a human Daniel. He was not a soldier, not a leader, not even one of the queen's people. He had once been a traveler from a distant world, stranded here when his ship was lost in space. For years he had lived quietly among the aliens, working small jobs, learning their ways, and expecting nothing more than to survive. But as he listened to the queen, his eyes were drawn not only to her but to the great display screens that floated in the plaza. The royal engineers projected maps of the war, lines of fleets, circles of star systems, arrows of attack and retreat. Daniel was no general, yet he studied the maps carefully. Something about them made him frown. He noticed a narrow line of stars near the enemy's territory, a path that all their supply ships had to use. It was thin, like a neck between two vast regions of space. To him, it looked obvious, too obvious. Why had no one thought to strike there? Why waste ships in open battles when cutting off supplies could weaken the enemy faster? Daniel looked around. No one seemed to notice. The queen spoke of bravery, the advisors whispered of sacrifice, and the crowd only sank deeper into worry. His heart beat faster. He wanted to speak, to shout, but he was only a human, an outsider. Who would listen? Still, he felt a weight pressing on him. He could stay silent and let the war go on, or he could risk making a fool of himself. He remembered something his father once told him long ago: silence never changes anything. Sometimes one voice is enough. The queen's speech came to a close. She bowed her head and said, "We fight on, though our path is uncertain." She turned to leave, but Daniel found his voice. "Wait," he called out. His voice was not loud, but in the silence it carried. The crowd turned, eyes falling on the strange human at the edge. Whispers rose at once. "It is the human. What does he want? He should stay quiet." Daniel felt his face grow hot, but he did not step back. He raised his hand toward the great war maps. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady now, "forgive me, but I see something on your maps. Something important." Gasps spread. No one spoke to the queen so boldly, not even her own nobles. Yet Queen Arya did not grow angry. Instead, she looked down at him with weary curiosity. "And what is it that you see, stranger?" Daniel pointed at the narrow star passage on the screen. "Here. The enemy uses this corridor again and again. All their supply ships pass through it. If you strike there, you do not have to fight their full fleet. You only have to cut their fuel, their food, their weapons. Without supplies, even the strongest army weakens. The nobles behind the queen laughed in disbelief. A simple worker gives war lessons, one sneered. What does a human know of fleets and battles, another mocked. The crowd too seemed doubtful, yet a ripple of thought passed through them. His words made sense, simple as they were. Queen Arya raised her hand, silencing the mockery. Her eyes remained on Daniel. There was no laughter in them, only thought. Her people had fought for years with great strategies and greater losses. Perhaps it was not strength they needed now, but a new way of thinking. For the first time in many months, she felt a spark of something she had almost forgotten possibility. The plaza remained in silence after Daniel's words. Thousands of eyes were fixed on the lone human who had dared to speak where none else would. The storm clouds above rumbled, and the banners flapped weakly as if waiting for the queen's answer. Queen Arya did not speak right away. Her gaze lingered on Daniel, studying his plain clothing, his tired face, and his steady eyes. He was not like her nobles with their jeweled armor or polished words. He looked ordinary, almost forgettable, yet he spoke with a courage that others lacked. Finally, she asked, "What is your name, human?" Daniel bowed slightly. "Daniel, your majesty." Murmurs filled the plaza again. Some voices carried scorn, others disbelief. Daniel? A worker? He thinks he knows more than our generals. Yet the queen lifted her hand, and the whispers died away. "Daniel," she said, "you speak of striking at the enemy's supplies. Tell us why you believe this path matters." Daniel took a slow breath. He had never spoken before such a crowd, nor to a ruler. His palms felt damp, but he did not step back. He pointed again to the shining war map above. "The core are strong," he began. "Stronger than you in ships, in weapons, in numbers. To face them directly is like fighting a storm with bare hands. But storms depend on clouds, and armies depend on supplies. They need food, fuel, and weapons to fight. If you take away those things, the army weakens without a battle." He moved closer, pointing to the narrow star passage again. "Here is their mistake. They use this corridor every time. It is the shortest path, maybe the only safe path for their supply ships. They believe no one will strike there because you are too busy fighting their fleets in open space. But if you cut the line, they will not be able to keep fighting for long." The plaza remained hushed. His words were simple, but their meaning carried weight. Even those who distrusted the human could see the truth in the map. Yet the nobles behind the queen scoffed. One stepped forward, his armor gleaming. "Your Majesty, this is nonsense. We have studied war for generations. We know the ways of fleets, the moves of enemies. And this man, this stranger, thinks he can solve it with a single suggestion." Another noble added sharply, "He does not even belong to our people. Why trust him when your own generals stand ready to serve?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Some nodded with the nobles, but others looked at Daniel with a spark of curiosity. After so many losses, perhaps an outsider's eyes could see what theirs had missed. Queen Arya raised her hand again, silencing all. She turned back to Daniel. "You speak bravely. But tell me, why do you care? This is not your war. You are not one of my people. What do you gain from offering such advice?" Daniel hesitated. He had asked himself the same question while standing among the crowd. He could have stayed silent. But as he looked at the weary faces in the plaza, he found his answer. "I care," he said softly, "because I live here now. Your people gave me shelter when I was lost. I work in your cities, walk your streets, share food with your children. This is my home as much as it is yours. If the core win, I lose everything too. I may not be one of your warriors, but I will not stand aside while this world falls. The words struck deeper than any polished speech. For a moment even the nobles were silent. The queen's eyes softened, though doubt still flickered in her heart. At last, she spoke. Daniel, your idea is bold. Boldness is sometimes what saves nations, yet it is also what destroys them. To risk ships in this plan may bring victory, or it may bring another loss we cannot afford. She turned to her council. What say you, my generals? The nobles muttered among themselves. Some shook their heads firmly. Others looked uneasy. None wanted to risk their honor on the advice of a human. Daniel lowered his hand. He knew his place. He had spoken, and that was all he could do. The queen would choose as she wished. Still, he felt a strange calm inside. He had given his voice. Whatever came after, he would not regret it. The queen looked out over her people once more. Their faces showed no anger toward Daniel, now only tired hope, thin but still alive. She turned back to him and said, Your words will not be forgotten. I cannot promise to act on them yet, but I will consider what you have said. Daniel bowed again. That is all I ask. The queen ended the gathering and returned to her chambers. Her nobles followed, still whispering doubts. Yet when she sat in silence that night, staring at the star maps in her private hall, her thoughts returned again and again to the human's words. Supplies. Weakness. A simple path. For years her people had fought with pride, seeking great victories in open space. Yet pride had given them only loss. Could it be that the answer lay not in power, but in seeing what others refused to see? The queen closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would decide whether to trust the wisdom of her nobles or the strange courage of a human from the crowd. Night lingered over the royal city, and the halls of the palace were filled with quiet tension. Queen Arya sat at the great table of war, the glowing maps spread before her like a web of stars. Her nobles argued around her, voices rising and falling like waves crashing against stone. Some demanded more ships at the front, others cried for retreat, and a few whispered of surrender. But none offered a true answer. Daniel's words still echoed in her mind. Strike the supplies. Cut the line. It sounded so simple. Too simple, perhaps. Yet sometimes truth was found not in complicated plans but in what was overlooked. Finally, the queen raised her hand. The chamber fell silent. I have heard your counsel, she said. But I will not risk all our fleets at once. Instead, I will send a small force a test. If this human's idea proves false, the loss will be small. If it proves true, then we will have a path forward. Her nobles exchanged uneasy glances. To follow the advice of an outsider was an insult to them, but none dared to openly defy the queen's command. So it was decided. The next morning, a small fleet of 10 warships prepared to depart. They were not the strongest vessels, but they carried brave crews. The captains whispered doubts among themselves. We go to chase shadows, one said. A worker's dream will not win wars, another grumbled. But orders were orders, and soon the ships lifted into the sky, leaving the world behind in streaks of fire. Daniel stood on the edge of the launch platform, watching them disappear into the blackness of space. He had not been asked to join. He was no soldier, but he felt his heart beating fast, as if part of him had gone with them. He wondered if he had made a mistake. What if the corridor was not as weak as he believed? What if he had only sent good people to die? Back in the palace, Queen Arya returned to her duties, but her thoughts strayed again and again to the fleet. She did not show her worry to her people, yet in the silence of her chamber, she pressed her hand to the glowing crystal crown and whispered a prayer that they would return. Days passed. The fleet slipped through the cold emptiness between stars, guided by Daniel's map. The corridor stretched ahead of them, narrow and dark, with only a thin chain of stars marking the way. At first, the passage seemed empty. Some captains believed the human was wrong. Others grew restless. But then, on the fourth day, the lookouts saw them core supply ships. Dozens of them, heavy with fuel, weapons, and food. They were guarded only by a few escort ships, far fewer than a battle fleet. The alien captains looked at one another. Could it truly be so easy? With a single command, the warships fell upon the convoy. Beams of fire cut across the void, striking engines and cargo bays. Explosions lit the darkness as the core ships struggled to defend themselves, but the ambush was too sudden. One by one, they fell, scattering burning fragments into the stars. When the last ship was destroyed, silence filled the comms. The captains could hardly believe it. A victory clear and clean. Not against a full fleet, but against the lifeline that fed it. They turned their ships back toward home, carrying news that would shake the empire. On the 10th day, the fleet returned. Their banners shone bright as they descended through the sky, and the people filled the city streets to see them. Voices rose in cheers for the first time in months. The plaza, once heavy with fear, now rang with hope. Daniel stood among the crowd, almost hidden, yet he felt their joy as if it were his own. He had spoken, and it had mattered. His chest swelled with pride, though he said nothing. Queen Arya stepped forward to greet the returning captains. "You have done well," she told them. "Your courage has given our people breath again." Then she turned to the crowd and declared, "The core are not invincible. Their strength can be broken." The cheers grew louder, echoing against the towers of the city. For a moment, the world seemed alive again. That night, the queen called Daniel to her hall. He entered nervously, bowing low. She studied him for a long moment, her crystal crown glowing faintly in the quiet. "Your idea saved us," she said. "For the first time in years, I feel hope in my heart. You saw what none of us saw. Tell me, Daniel, how did you know?" He shrugged softly. "I didn't know. I only noticed what others seemed to ignore. Sometimes the simple path is the strongest. I only spoke because silence would have been worse." The queen smiled faintly. "You are no soldier, yet you think as one. From this day, you will not stand at the edge of the crowd. You will sit at my council." Daniel's eyes widened. "Me? I am just a worker. I know little of your ways." "Perhaps that is why I need you," she replied. "My nobles know too much of pride and tradition. You see things differently. That may be our greatest weapon." And so it was decided. The human who once lived in shadows now stood among the leaders of a war. Many nobles muttered in secret, angered that a stranger was given such honor. But the queen did not waver. The tide of war had shifted, and at the heart of it was the voice of one man who dared to speak. The palace halls were quiet after the queen ended her gathering, but her mind was not at rest. That night she sat alone in the chamber of stars, where glowing maps of the galaxy floated above a round table. Fleets, battles, and losses were marked across the skies in shining symbols. She stared at them for hours. Her nobles had given her endless speeches of bravery and sacrifice, yet none had shown her a clear path to victory. And then came the voice of a human, a simple man from the crowd. "Strike the supplies," he had said. His words echoed in her heart like a seed taking root. At last, she called her generals and nobles to council once more. Their cloaks and armor gleamed as they entered the chamber, though their faces showed fatigue. None expected what the queen was about to say. "I will test the human's idea," she announced. Her voice was calm but firm. "A small fleet will go to the narrow corridor he described. They will wait for the core supply convoys and strike. If it fails, our loss is little. If it succeeds, the enemy will bleed without open battle." The nobles looked at one another in disbelief. One spoke quickly. "Your Majesty, we cannot risk even a small fleet on the words of an outsider. He knows nothing of our ways." Perhaps he knows nothing of our ways, the queen replied, and perhaps that is why he sees what we do not. No one dared argue further. Her decision was final. Within 2 days, 10 warships were prepared. They were not the strongest ships in the fleet, but each carried skilled crews who had fought bravely in past battles. Before they departed, the captains met with the queen. They bowed low, though their eyes carried doubt. "You go not to chase glory," the queen told them, "but to test the path of wisdom. Return with truth, whether it be bitter or sweet." Daniel watched quietly from the edge of the launch platform. He had not been invited to join the mission. He was not a soldier, but his heart pounded as the ships lifted into the skies. Flames trailed behind them as they broke through the atmosphere, climbing higher and higher until they vanished into the stars. For the first time, Daniel wondered if he had done right. What if he had been wrong? What if his simple idea led those brave men and women to their deaths? He clenched his fists and whispered, "Please let me be right." The palace halls were quiet after the queen ended her gathering, but her mind was not at rest. That night she sat alone in the chamber of stars, where glowing maps of the galaxy floated above a round table. Fleets, battles, and losses were marked across the skies in shining symbols. She stared at them for hours. Her nobles had given her endless speeches of bravery and sacrifice, yet none had shown her a clear path to victory. And then came the voice of a human, a simple man from the crowd. "Strike the supplies," he had said. His words echoed in her heart like a seed taking root. At last, she called her generals and nobles to council once more. Their cloaks and armor gleamed as they entered the chamber, though their faces showed fatigue. None expected what the queen was about to say. "I will test the humans' idea," she announced. Her voice was calm but firm. "A small fleet will go to the narrow corridor he described. They will wait for the core supply convoys and strike. If it fails, our loss is little. If it succeeds, the enemy will bleed without open battle." The nobles looked at one another in disbelief. One spoke quickly. "Your Majesty, we cannot risk even a small fleet on the words of an outsider. He knows nothing of our ways." "Perhaps he knows nothing of our ways," the queen replied, "and perhaps that is why he sees what we do not." No one dared argue further. Her decision was final. Within 2 days, 10 warships were prepared. They were not the strongest ships in the fleet, but each carried skilled crews who had fought bravely in past battles. Before they departed, the captains met with the queen. They bowed low, though their eyes carried doubt. "You go not to chase glory," the queen told them, "but to test the path of wisdom. Return with truth, whether it be bitter or sweet." Daniel watched quietly from the edge of the launch platform. He had not been invited to join the mission. He was not a soldier, but his heart pounded as the ships lifted into the skies. Flames trailed behind them as they broke through the atmosphere, climbing higher and higher until they vanished into the stars. For the first time, Daniel wondered if he had done right. What if he had been wrong? What if his simple idea led those brave men and women to their deaths? He clenched his fists and whispered, "Please let me be right." The victory at the Star Corridor spread across the Queen's empire like a spark in dry grass. For the first time in many years, the people lifted their heads with pride instead of fear. In the markets, children laughed again. In the barracks, soldiers spoke with fire in their voices. The name of Queen Arya was praised, and even the human Daniel was whispered about with curiosity. But inside the palace, not all hearts were filled with joy. The nobles sat in the council chamber, their eyes fixed on Daniel, who now stood among them. He wore no armor, no crest, no robe of rank. His clothes were plain, and his hands bore the marks of labor, not battle. Yet when he spoke, the queen listened. That truth stung the nobles deeply. General Corvan, a tall alien with silver scales, crossed his arms. "We were trained for war since childhood," he muttered to his fellow generals. "And now a human farmer speaks and the queen gives him a seat beside us. Another noble added, "If this continues, our people will follow his words more than ours. He is not one of us. How long before he decides the shape of our future?" Though they whispered, the queen knew their thoughts. She could see the pride in their eyes, the jealousy, the doubt. Yet she would not cast Daniel aside. His ideas had brought hope, and she needed hope as much as ships and soldiers. The days that followed brought more victories. Following Daniel's suggestion, small fleets struck again and again at the enemy's supply convoys. Each attack left the core weaker, their fleet slower, their lines thinner. The queen's people began to believe they could truly win. But with each victory, the shadow of tension grew larger. In the council chamber, Daniel spoke simply. "The enemy is learning. They will not keep sending their supplies the same way. Soon they will protect them more strongly, or choose new routes. You must be ready for change." Some generals frowned. "He is too bold," one said. "He speaks as if he commands us." Another added coldly, "And when his next idea fails, who will pay the price? Not him. Our sons and daughters will be the ones lost." Daniel heard their words but answered calmly. "I do not seek to command. I only see what I can. The enemy thinks you will never fight with cunning, only with honor. Use that mistake against them." Queen Arya's gaze lingered on him. She could sense the truth in his words, though she also saw the bitterness in the eyes of her council. She knew she was walking a thin path between trust and betrayal, between old ways and new. Outside the council, Daniel felt the weight of strange stares. In the city streets, some bowed to him as if he were a hero. Others spat at his feet, calling him a meddler. Children asked him questions about Earth, his lost home, though he often stayed silent, for the memories pained him. At night he sat alone in his small quarters, staring at the stars. He had not asked for honor or position. He had only spoken because he could not remain silent. Yet now, his words carried the power to shape battles and fates. He wondered if he was strong enough for such a role. Queen Arya too felt the burden. In the quiet of her chambers, she removed her glowing crown and set it on the table. Without it, she looked less like a queen and more like a weary woman carrying too many weights. Daniel visited her once in those late hours, after being summoned. He found her staring at the maps, her hands folded tightly. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "you are troubled." She looked up, her eyes tired but steady. "I fear I am failing my people. Every choice I make feels like stepping into darkness. I wonder if they follow me only because they have no other." Daniel stepped closer. "They follow because you do not give up. Even when hope was nearly gone, you stood before them with courage. That is what a leader does, not always to know every answer, but to carry the weight when others cannot." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Strange, that a human reminds me of what I am." "You remind them too," he replied. "You are their queen. Do not forget that." The queen nodded slowly, and for the first time that night, the heaviness in her eyes softened. But while the queen found comfort, not all shared it. In the deep chambers of the palace, a group of generals met in secret. The shadows cloaked their faces, but their voices were sharp with anger. "This human must be removed," one hissed. "He clouds the queen's mind," another said. "If we allow this, soon we will have no place in her court. Better to end it now, before he leads us all into ruin." And so, while Daniel guided the queen with honest words, the seeds of betrayal grew in the hearts of those who could not bear the thought of losing their pride. The war outside raged on, but within the palace walls, another battle had already begun, one of trust, jealousy, and the fragile thread of loyalty that could snap at any moment. The palace glowed under silver moons, its tall towers reaching toward the night sky. To the people outside, it was a symbol of strength and hope. But inside, the air was heavy with whispers, and not all those whispers were loyal. The generals who once stood proudly by Queen Arya now gathered in secret halls deep beneath the palace. Their faces were hard, their voices sharp. They had fought in the war for years, losing friends, fleets, and honor. Now a single human stood beside their queen, shaping her choices, guiding her steps. General Corvan slammed his fist on the table. Every day she listens to him more. Does she not see that he is an outsider? He is not of our people. He knows nothing of our blood, our pride. Yet she lets him lead where we should lead. Another general, older and weary, nodded slowly. The soldiers speak of him. The people whisper his name. They call him wise. They call him savior. If this continues, he will stand above us all. Is that what we have fought for? To be replaced by a stranger? The room grew quiet, but not with peace. It was the silence of shared anger, of pride wounded too deeply. At last one spoke the words all had been thinking. Then we must end this. If the queen will not see the danger, we must act ourselves. And so, in the shadows, betrayal was born. Meanwhile, Daniel knew nothing of these secret meetings. His days were filled with maps, councils, and quiet talks with the queen. He often reminded her that he was no soldier, but she would only smile and say, "Perhaps that is why your words are clear. You see what others cannot." But Daniel felt the tension. In the council chamber, he saw the looks the generals gave him, cold, sharp, like blades waiting to strike. He heard the whispers when he passed through the palace halls. Some bowed to him, but others turned away with scorn. One evening, he asked Queen Arya, "Do your generals trust me?" She paused before answering. "Trust is slow to grow, Daniel. They respect strength, and to them, strength means tradition. You are outside that tradition. Then why keep me at your side?" he asked softly. The queen looked at him with calm eyes. "Because you remind me that there are other ways. You remind me that victory may not come from what we know, but from what we are willing to see." Her words warmed him, yet they also deepened his worry. He knew her trust was a gift, but it also placed him in danger among those who could not accept change. The next council meeting was held in the Grand Hall, where banners of the Empire hung from crystal pillars. The war map glowed brightly in the air, showing the fading lines of the core. Daniel stood beside the queen as she addressed her nobles. "The enemy weakens," she said. "Their fleets move slower, their attacks grow smaller. We have struck their supplies, and the blow is felt. But the war is not over. We must decide our next move." Before Daniel could speak, General Corvan stepped forward. His voice was loud, his tone filled with challenge. "Your Majesty, forgive me, but we must ask, why do you still listen to this human? He is no warrior, no leader. He risks nothing, yet his words place our fleets in danger. He is not one of us." Murmurs spread through the hall. Some nobles nodded in agreement, others stayed silent. Daniel stood still, though his heart beat fast. Queen Arya raised her hand. "General, the humans' ideas have brought us victories where none of ours had. Would you cast aside what works, simply because it does not come from your pride?" Corvan's eyes narrowed. "Or perhaps, Majesty, he seeks to guide us into ruin. What if his loyalty is false? What if he weakens us so the enemy may strike?" The hall filled with gasps. To accuse someone of treachery was no small thing. All eyes turned to Daniel. He felt the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. He stepped forward, speaking not loudly, but clearly. "If I wished your ruin, I would have stayed silent. I would have let the core crush you, as they nearly did. But I spoke because silence would have doomed us all. I ask for no reward, no place of honor. I only ask that you see what lies before you." The queen watched him closely, her eyes unreadable. The generals waited, hungry for her answer. At last, Daniel turned to the glowing war map and pointed toward a dark nebula near the edge of enemy space. "Here," he said. "The Corps hide their command base within these clouds. It is from here that they send orders, here that they gather their fleets. Strike there, and you do not only wound them, you cut the head from the beast." The hall fell into silence. It was a daring plan, more dangerous than any before. To fly into the nebula was to enter blindness, where sensors failed and traps could hide in every shadow. The generals looked at one another. Some saw madness, others saw possibility. Queen Arya rose to her feet. "This plan is bold," she said slowly. "And boldness may be our only path to freedom. I will lead this strike myself." The nobles cried out, shocked. The queen, risking herself? The generals argued, voices clashing like steel. Yet over them all, her voice rang firm. "Enough. The choice is mine. If we do not strike, the war will drag until we have nothing left. If we do strike, there is risk but also hope." Her eyes turned to Daniel. "You have shown me courage not of sword, but of mind. I will trust it once more." Daniel bowed his head, though worry gnawed at him. He had offered his boldest idea yet. Now the fate of a people rested on whether it would save them or destroy them. The fleet gathered at the edge of the stars, silent as hunters before the chase. Dozens of ships floated in formation, their silver hulls glimmering faintly in the pale light of distant suns. Beyond them stretched the vast darkness of the nebula, a swirling cloud of violet gas and shadow. It was beautiful, but every warrior who looked upon it knew that danger hid inside. In the command ship, Queen Arya stood before the viewing glass. Her armor shone under the lights, yet her expression was calm, her gaze steady. She knew the risk of what they were about to attempt. One mistake, and her fleet could be lost in the cloud, swallowed by traps or ambushed by the enemy. But her choice had already been made. At her side stood Daniel, hands clasped behind his back. He felt small among the tall warriors and glowing screens, yet he also felt the weight of history. His idea had led them here, and now their fate rested on whether it would succeed. The queen turned to her captains. "You know your orders. We will enter the nebula in silence. No signals, no lights. We move as shadows. Trust your instincts, and trust one another. Today, we strike not just to fight, but to end this war." The captains struck their fists to their chests in salute. The sound echoed through the command deck, a promise of loyalty and courage. The ships began their slow advance into the nebula. At once, the stars disappeared, swallowed by swirling clouds of violet and black. Sensors flickered, their readings breaking apart into static. The silence was deep, broken only by the low hum of engines. Daniel pressed his hand against the glass, staring into the endless mist. He could see nothing, yet he felt the tension in the air, the fear that the enemy could appear at any moment. Minutes stretched like hours. Every shadow in the nebula looked like a hidden ship, every flicker of light like the spark of a weapon. The fleet moved carefully, guided only by memory and instinct. Then it came. A sudden flare of light cut through the mist, followed by the roar of energy blasts. Enemy ships burst from the clouds, their dark hulls glowing red. The Corps had been waiting. "Shields up," the Queen commanded. "Return fire." The silence of the nebula shattered into chaos. Beams of light tore through the clouds, lighting up the darkness in flashes of war. Ships twisted and turned, dodging enemy fire while unleashing their own. The entire nebula seemed to burn as metal clashed against metal. Daniel gripped the railing, his heart pounding. The enemy was fierce, their ships moving with precision. Yet he noticed something. Their attacks came in waves, but always from the same direction, as if they were guarding something deeper in the nebula. He turned quickly to the Queen. "They're not fighting to destroy us, they're fighting to delay us. The base must be farther inside." Queen Arya's eyes narrowed. She gave a sharp nod. Signal the fleet, break through. Follow me. Her command ship surged forward, cutting through enemy lines. The fleet followed, pushing deeper into the mist even as enemy fire rained upon them. Inside the thickest part of the nebula, the clouds swirled like living things. And then, through the haze, it appeared a massive station hidden within the gas, its towers glowing with power. It was the core command base, the heart of their war. But as soon as it came into view, the true trap was revealed. Around the station lay dozens of enemy warships, waiting in silence until now. They powered their weapons at once, surrounding the Queen's fleet. Gasps filled the command deck. The odds were overwhelming. "We cannot face them all," one captain said grimly. Daniel's mind raced. He looked again at the nebula, at the way the gas shifted and swirled with every blast of energy. Then it struck him. The nebula, it reacts to energy. If we strike it with enough force, the gas will ignite. A chain reaction could destroy their defenses. The captains looked at him in shock. It was a desperate idea. The explosion could also consume their own fleet. But Queen Arya's eyes lit with resolve. Desperate times call for desperate courage. Prepare the weapons. Her voice rang clear through the fleet. All ships, target the gas clouds. On my command, fire everything you have. For freedom, for our future. The warriors roared their answer. The moment came. Dozens of ships fired at once, beams of light piercing the nebula. For a breath, nothing happened. Then the gas ignited. A wave of fire swept through the clouds, racing toward the enemy ships. The core fleet scattered in panic, their formation breaking apart. Explosions tore through their lines as fire consumed them. The great station shuddered under the shock, its shields failing, its towers breaking apart. The Queen's fleet was battered by the shock wave, but they had prepared for it. Their shields held just enough, and they pushed through the storm of fire, striking the weakened station with everything they had. At last, with a final thunderous blast, the core command base collapsed, its glowing towers falling into the burning mist. The enemy fleet, leaderless and broken, scattered into the darkness. Cheers erupted through the Queen's ship. Warriors shouted, pounding their fists in triumph. For the first time in years, victory was theirs. Queen Arya stood tall, her voice steady though her heart raced. "This day will be remembered," she declared. "The day we broke the chains of war." Daniel let out a long breath, his body trembling with relief. He had risked everything on a desperate idea, and somehow, it had worked. But deep in his heart, he knew the war was not yet fully over. The enemy had been broken, yes, but not destroyed. And betrayal still lingered in the shadows of the palace. The greatest battles, he feared, were still to come. The fleet returned from the nebula in silence. Their victory had been great, yet the cost weighed on everyone. Ships limped back, scarred from battle. The warriors were proud but also weary. For years they had known only war, and now, for the first time, peace seemed possible. On the command ship, Queen Arya stood with Daniel beside her. She watched the stars pass by, her face calm but her heart heavy. She had seen too much loss to celebrate freely. Still, she allowed herself a small smile. They had struck the greatest blow against the enemy. Soon, this war would end. But even as hope spread through the fleet, shadows stirred in the palace far away. When the Queen returned to her throne hall, she was greeted by cheers. Warriors filled the chamber, their voices rising in honor of her leadership. Yet among the crowd, eyes burned with hidden anger. Some lords and advisers had long whispered that the Queen relied too much on the human. To them, Daniel was an outsider, unworthy of such trust. As the cheering faded, Lord Cairn, one of the high counselors, stepped forward. His robe shimmered with jewels, and his voice was strong. "My queen," he said, bowing low. We rejoice in victory. But questions must be answered. Was it truly your wisdom that guided us, or was it the advice of this human who stands by your side? Murmurs spread through the hall. Daniel felt every eye upon him. His chest tightened, but he stood tall. Queen Arya's voice rang clear. It was both. The human offered a path, but it was my command that led us to triumph. Victory belongs not to one, but to all who fought for it. Lord Cairn's smile was thin. And yet, to give such power to an outsider is dangerous. What if his advice had failed? What if it is all a trick? Whispers grew louder. Some warriors frowned, torn between loyalty and doubt. Daniel's heart sank. He had expected resistance, but not so soon after their greatest victory. He took a step forward. I never came here to rule, he said simply. I only offered what I knew, hoping to help. Nothing more. The Queen placed her hand on his shoulder. And help you did. Without him, we would not stand here in triumph. Do not let fear blind you to truth. But Lord Cairn's eyes hardened. He bowed again, yet there was no respect in his movement. As you command, my queen. Days passed. The queen worked to rebuild her forces, preparing for the final push to secure peace. Yet Daniel noticed strange movements in the palace. Guards loyal to Cairn whispered in the shadows. Messages were carried in secret. One night, Daniel walked alone in the garden, the stars shining above. He felt unease, as if someone watched him. Then a voice spoke from the darkness. Human. He turned. It was General Thalos, a warrior known for his honor. His expression was grim. There is a plot. Lord Cairn gathers followers. They plan to overthrow the queen, claiming her trust in you has weakened her. Daniel's blood ran cold. When? Soon. They wait for the right moment. You must warn her. The next morning, Daniel stood before the queen in her chamber. He told her everything. She listened quietly, her eyes thoughtful. So it comes to this, she said at last. Even after victory, there are those who fear change. They would rather cling to pride than accept the truth. Daniel looked at her. What will you do? She rose from her throne, her figure tall and strong. What I must. A queen does not bow to fear. That evening, the council gathered again. Queen Arya addressed them, her voice sharp and clear. Lords and warriors, she said, we have fought too long, lost too much. Now we stand on the edge of peace. Yet some among us would throw it away. They speak of fear, of doubt, of betrayal. I will not allow it. Lord Cairn stepped forward, his face hard. Then you force my hand, Queen. If you will not see reason, you will be replaced. At his signal, guards loyal to him moved forward. But before they could act, warriors loyal to the Queen stepped between them, weapons drawn. The hall erupted in tension. Daniel felt his heart hammering, but he remembered his place. He raised his voice, firm though not loud. Listen to yourselves. You fight not the enemy, but each other. The enemy hoped for this to see you divided. Do not give them victory now, after all we have sacrificed. His words struck the hall like a spark. Some of Cairn's followers hesitated, shame in their eyes. The Queen stepped forward, her gaze burning. Cairn, she said, you sought power at the cost of unity. You are no leader. You are a traitor. The warriors roared in agreement. Cairn's support crumbled, his guards lowering their weapons. He was seized and led away, his rebellion crushed before it could rise. Silence filled the hall. Then the Queen turned to Daniel. You stood with us when all was dark. You gave counsel when none saw a way. You are not an outsider, you are one of us. The warriors raised their voices, not in doubt this time, but in respect. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had never sought glory, but now, among these warriors, he felt something greater belonging. The queen lifted her hand. Today marks not only victory over the enemy, but victory over fear and division. Together, we will build a new dawn. And so it was. The war did not end in a single day, but the tide had turned. With their command base destroyed and their unity restored, the queen's people pushed forward with strength. Daniel remained by her side, not as a ruler, but as a trusted voice and a friend. In time, songs would be sung of the great battles, of the queen who stood unbroken, and of the human who gave hope when hope was almost lost. But for Daniel, the greatest reward was simpler. He had come as a stranger, and now he had found a home among the stars.